So we're talking about Spoon.
So I got into them at the previous album, which was Girls Can Tell, which came out in 2001. And nothing really, no sexy story to it. I just read about them in Spin, honestly. I think it tied into a lot of what I was listening to at the time,
Yeah.
getting into bands like Television. I had been into Talking Heads for a while, but bands like Television and even like Blondie's Parallel Lines was like big for me at that time. And then of course Elvis Costello and the Attractions. And I think that's kind of, I think they might have mentioned Elvis Costello as a parallel. And so I just got into Girls Can Tell, and I was hooked right away and just kind of went backwards from there. Yeah, whatever they had out at the time, which was 2 other albums. Yeah. And then by the time Kill the Moonlight came out, I that's when I started referring to them as a favorite band. Like I would, they were like my new favorite band at that time. Yeah. So I was sold at that point. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's a very, very contrasting story for me because I'd never heard of them. I was working as a music journalist at the time, and I was in that incredibly unique position where I look back on it now and I just think I just didn't know how lucky I was. But I was on the receiving end of a lot of promo CDs. People were sending me things left, right, and center in the hope that I would review them. And the Spoon one came through. It came through in a proper CD case, because lots of discs would just come through in these little sorts of plastic envelopes, but this one came through, and I remember queuing it up on the CD player along with God knows how many other discs at the time. And I really didn't take to it at all. I I found it irritating. I
Yeah.
genuinely thought, this is getting on my nerves, this music. And my immediate reaction when music irritates me, I tend to react very badly against it. That's why I couldn't listen to REM for years, because Michael Stipe irritated me. I have got
Yeah.
over that now, I should just say.
Yeah.
But with this Spoon record, I kept going back to it despite being irritated by it. And when it wasn't playing, I found myself thinking about the songs and trying to work out what was irritating me. And I was thinking, there's something going on there, because usually if music irritates me, I will just try and block it out of my consciousness, not listen to it, not think about it. Whereas this was the opposite. It was kind of niggling at me, and then I kept going back to it and listening to it and trying to piece together what it was that I thought I didn't like about it. And then within a couple of weeks, I just couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you became a super fan almost immediately and started backtracking and buying the records, whereas I like this album so much. I sort of deliberately didn't listen to any more Spoon records for about 10 years because I thought there's no way they're going to have made an album as good as this one. And I don't want to spoil it. I'm just going to stick with Kill the Moonlight. That can be my Spoon record. It's fantastic. And I left it at that, until quite
Yeah.
recently.
I think that's a perfectly, I understand that response, like immediately. And I think a lot of people didn't really get into this band with this album. I think they either got into them with Girls Can Tell, if they got into them that early, or it was the next one, Gimme Fiction. I think Gimme Fiction was really kind of like their bigger breakthrough. And then every album has just been more and more popular as they've gone along. So, which is also rare for a lot of bands, I think. But yeah, they just continue to just grow their audience. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've backtracked now, obviously, and listened to the first 3 records. And even though they're good, there is a sense when you get to Kill the Moonlight, there is a sense that they've had a sort of light bulb switch on moment, or something's happened because the piano suddenly enters the picture. It's been a bit more guitar-y, a bit more indie, maybe a bit of Pixies, maybe a bit of this, maybe a bit of that. And then all of a sudden you get into Kill the Moonlight, and it's all of a sudden it's just really minimal, really stripped back.
Yeah.
And there's this piano I think it was the piano that started to hook me in because I love pianos, I love keyboards in music, and I always
Mhm.
felt a little bit guilty about Ben Folds 5 because I never really got into them very much. I found them a bit
Yeah.
annoying again. Whereas
Yeah.
there was something about the way Spoon used the piano which I just found totally compelling. It was the most piano-iest piano I'd ever heard. It was just like, right, they've got this piano and they've sort of placed it center stage, and the songs are now they sound really constructed now and really sculpted.
Mhm.
We'll get into this. I was going to ask you what you know about their compositional methods because I know nothing about the band at
Mhm.
all really, but the
Mhm.
tunes did sound like almost they'd been pieced together almost using a sampler, or just maybe even they sat down with a pen and paper and sketched them out as a kind of architectural design and then went into the studio. um, but just before we get on to that, I think the thing that annoyed me that I realized I liked after all was this tension release thing where the songs
Uh-huh.
didn't seem to have a release mechanism built into them. They were just studies in tension. So they were just a verse and then another bit, back to the verse, stop, next song, uptight
Yeah.
sounding bit,
Yeah.
sound comes in, stop, next song. And after a while, I was like, "Oh, just give me a chorus, give me some release, give me some."
Right.
But the record doesn't seem interested in that. It's more of a study in
Mhm.
tension for the sake of it, almost, and almost like a guy whose back is to the wall, and he's just showing you different angles on that situation rather
Mhm.
than seeking an escape from it or seeking a release from it. It's just right. This is the situation I'm in, and I'm going to tell you about it, and you're going to get a bit unnerved by this experience.
It was not intentional. There was no game plan to go into this album with a minimal approach. I
Okay.
think that what happened was it was it kind of just happened naturally. It was the second time working with Mike McCarthy. The first time, who's the producer. The first album was Girls Can Tell before, and I think they were just kind of getting to know each other with Girls Can Tell. He also came in at a certain period where they had already been working on the album with other people, and then he just kind of came in and helped them hone the sound of that record. So then they started this one with him as the producer in mind. And I think that they just kind of naturally came to the decision making process was just like, this is just all we need.
Mm.
It wasn't like we're going to intentionally make a minimal sounding record. It was just as they started working on the songs and as Britt started bringing in the demos, they just started to realize that this is kind of all we need. We just need to kind of add in a few things here or there. And I think it was that was the process. It was more, this is what we have, this is what we're going to add to it, and less, here it is, here's all of this stuff, now let's start taking things away. I've always found it interesting that the minimal thing wasn't the approach from the get-go, because it is such a big deal on the record, and that's what every critic said about it.
Mm.
That was also why it received so much praise, I think, was because of that. I guess that maybe also part of it is that really Spoon at this time was only Britt, Daniel, and the drummer Jim Eno. Like, so there's only two guys, and they're playing everything. So I think that maybe that just kind of also brought those results. That's why it's so unique in their catalog. No other record is as minimal as this one.
I mean, just for the sake of people who maybe don't know this band, I've asked you to come up with a list of 5 artists that you think, well,
Mhm.
if people like those 5 artists, they would also like Spoon. And I've done the same, and I thought it'd be quite good fun to compare lists. So, do you want me to just read out my list first, and then
Yeah,
see if your list has any resemblance
sure,
to it? So
sure.
I've got Elvis Costello,
Yep,
obviously, from a certain
yep,
period, sort of early Elvis, the first maybe 3 or 4 albums.
yep.
I've got early Sabbath,
Whoa, interesting.
because of just those mean sounding stripped back guitars, which is
Okay.
just incredibly focused, just no
Yeah.
frills or anything, just very driving, very dark sounding.
Okay.
Now this next one is fairly obvious to me, but it's Wire, the British band Wire.
Yep.
And that's
Yep.
because of the minimal thing. There was a guy in that band who was a sculptor. It was Bruce Gilbert, was a sculptor, and he viewed that band basically as a kind of modern art project. It wasn't a band; it was a
Uh-huh.
sculpture for him, quite literally.
Right.
And I think, the spoon sound has that kind of sculpted dimension. Then
Yep.
I've got one which is a bit more wacky. Maybe I've got Sly and the Family Stone
Whoa. Okay.
for the sort of there's a kind of inherent blackness in there somewhere, which is maybe not always too near the surface, but I think it's definitely in there. And if you listen to There's a Riot Going On, some of the rhythms, some of the moods, I think
Huh.
I'd be surprised if they hadn't have listened to that album and maybe tried to suck it up into the Spoon DNA somewhere. I don't know. And then the
That's a
final one.
possibility.
Yeah, okay. And the final one came to me just this afternoon, and it's the Plastic Ono Band. Some of the tracks on
Oh.
on the on the first John Lennon solo album. I'm thinking of tracks like is it I Found Out?
Uh-huh.
Just again, just very stripped back, very minimal, slightly angry sounding and slightly bleak sounding, but with a bit of spirit to it as well. Not sort of abject despair, but more just angst, really.
I definitely agree. Wire. In
Mm.
fact, Spoon was the reason why I got into Wire, because Britt Daniel name checked them. Another band, two other bands that I got into directly because of Spoon, because Britt Daniel mentioned them, uh, were the Jam.
Mm.
There's some definite parallels with the Jam, and also the Fall.
Ah, right.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
I think that with the Jam, I think maybe that ties into the Sly and the Family Stone thing, because Weller had such um, a kinship with R&B, and there's a lot of like kind of a rhythm and blues kind of infused sound in the Jam, right? That's very strong in Spoon's music, especially in on Girls Can Tell, and also in this record.
Okay, so what we thought we'd do now is talk about some individual tracks on the record, and we've each come up with a list of songs, and I've got a feeling we've got some crossover, haven't we, John, by the sound of it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So I'll make a start and just want to talk briefly about just the first song on the record, which is called Small Stakes. And really, this kind of sets the groundwork for most of the record, doesn't it? It's very minimal. It basically consists of a vocal, this sort of, it's like a distorted organ. And there's a tambourine part which keeps coming in, playing this little repeating figure. But the song in general, it's got something of Iggy Pop about it. I don't know. It's something a bit amphetamine about it. It's, some guy. Well, I've just written here, he sounds slightly ill. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
maybe as if he's not been looking after himself too well.
kind of
Um,
like Idiot era Iggy Pop. Yeah,
definitely. But
yeah.
there's a sort of krautrock thing hovering around the edges of it. And
Hmm.
I mean, he talks in the song. I think a lyric references is a small town danger. He refers to a small town danger in your mid-sized car. It's very urban sounding, isn't it? This is not a nice pastoral scene. This is definitely happening probably at 3 in the morning on a
Yes.
deserted shopping estate somewhere. I mean, is that your take on this one as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there is kind of there's just a nighttime vibe in general of a early late not a late night early morning kind of vibe in general on this record.
Yeah.
Um, which I don't know if that really means anything, but that's just how it's always struck me.
Hmm.
You know, you're definitely right with Small Stakes setting the stage. Like and I think that when I first heard this record and I heard that song, that was where it caught me off guard, because it's so different from Girls Can Tell. So there's that synergy keyboard, that dun 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 dun, 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 like right, and then there's like an underlying drum machine kind of beat.
Hmm.
But then the thing at the end is those fills at the end, the kind of explosion at the end. And that was Mike McCarthy's idea, because he kind of felt like it needed a climax. It didn't have one initially. And he kind of referenced Suicide, and he said that it had a very Suicide feel, but it didn't have that kind of like he felt it just needed like that climactic kind of moment. And so he asked Jim to kind of come up with this kind of like drum part, but he didn't really know what he was going to do. And what he actually did was he played the fills extremely slow. So he just played them like bump, 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 like that. And then they played them back to tape sped up. So it
Mm.
sounds real time. So he kind of, even though Jim is an incredible drummer, and I think a lot of people don't hear that right away when they listen to them, but he is a very skilled, well-trained drummer. But he almost sounds like Keith Moon at the end. It's just kind of crazy. It's just all over the place, and it has like these extra effects on it. But it's just kind of that moment that's just kind of like, okay, we are here now. Like we have arrived.
Okay, so then the next track I've got, I think, is the next track on the album. I mean, I could have just gone for the first 5 songs, really, but I've gone for "The Way We Get By," which is the second track.
Okay.
And so I've just written a few things down here. I put White Stripes drums. Um, I don't know what you think about that. I mean, I can definitely hear shades of Meg White in the drums on this record. I mean, obviously,
Hmm.
she's a very untrained drummer. You just mentioned just now that the guy in this band is trained. So I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not making a value judgment as to who's better, but they've just got that very kind of primal, solid as hell kind of feel.
Yes.
Um, and then you got this sort of earworm piano riff in this one, and I put here, I don't know what you think. I put there's something ever so slightly jazzy about the piano. And I don't mean jazzy in the sense of obviously it's not Herbie Hancock, it's
All right.
not McCoy Tyner or anything, but there's something. It sounds like jazz, but it's also sounds a bit like the Velvet Underground as well. So it sounds almost at once totally untutored and also as if this guy knows quite a lot about the piano.
It was recorded on an upright in Britt's house.
Okay.
And Mike McCarthy talked about how he made sure, and he did this on a lot of these songs. He made him play it over and over and over and over and over again until it was like perfect. He just wanted every note, every chord to sound like purely intentional and perfect. It's very infectious. I think it's probably the first song that I ever heard to me from them at this point that sounded like it could be a radio hit.
Yes, I mean it's got a hook, hasn't it? I mean it's definitely got a
Yeah.
hook to it.
Yeah. Well, that repetitive, the way we get by, that's the way we get by. He actually started singing it as that's the way we get back, but he didn't think that that meant anything, or he couldn't wrap his head around what that meant. He changed it to that's the way we get by. And then all of a sudden it just kind of turned into, it made sense because it's like a list song almost.
Mm.
He's just kind of listing things. And it kind of just has this kind of beat kind of quality to it, this kind of like 60s kind of like beat kind of thing to it.
And so we go to Stay Don't Go now. So
Yeah.
so the song is Stay Don't Go. Now I wanted to highlight this one because this is the one with the kind of human beatbox,
Hmm.
which is incredibly distinctive and incredibly well done.
Yeah.
It just comes out of the speakers at you, and you just think, "Oh, wow, that's fantastic!"
Huh?
Pin sharp electric guitars, and there's this sound that keeps sort of coming towards you. I see it almost like a car with its lights on, all of a sudden sort of surging towards you. This
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's almost like
Yeah.
a nightmare. You're having some kind of flashback, or you're trying to get to sleep, and it keeps coming at you and jerking you awake all the time. There's just this sort of recurring thought process, this thing is almost like a neurosis, um,
Uh-huh.
something which is lurking.
That Yeah, that specific sound, I don't know how they made it. I don't know what they used to make it, but it is kind of it's like in reverse. It's like a
Yes.
reverse delay. It's kind of backwards. And they use that a lot throughout the record. And it actually kind of became a motif for a lot of the records that came after.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing we haven't really sort of delved into too deeply so far, and that is just Spoon as sonic innovators or manipulators of
Mhm.
sound. It's something which is definitely in their DNA, isn't it? I mean, when you listen to a Spoon album, you hear sounds that you've not heard before.
Britt Daniel, when they started the band, he had a job working for like the video game industry, which is pretty big in Austin. And he was a sound designer working on his video games. So a lot of times I think that that made its way into their music. Yeah, it's I don't know anybody else at that time that was doing that, like that kind of beatbox thing. It was almost, at first time I heard it, I was like, this is kind of cheesy. But then as it grew on me and it kind of started to feel a little bit cooler, it was kind of like, I was like, this is something I could imagine Prince doing.
I so nearly had Prince in my list. You know, the list of
Mhm.
artists. I can
Oh yeah.
definitely hear that sort of innovation and just that obsessiveness with sound and you know, finding new ways of recording and new ways of making sounds. That's definitely in there.
Yeah, definitely. Prince and Bowie, like big
Yeah,
time in the
yeah.
music. Yeah.
And also
Yeah.
maybe Eno as well. I mean, if you listen
Oh
to
yeah.
some of Eno's post-rock stuff, which is very, again, very minimal. Obviously, he's the father of
Right.
minimalism in pop music, isn't he? So, you know, you've got that parallel there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so then moving on then, I've got Jonathan Fisk, which is kind of the first proper big rock song on the record, really. And I was saying about, you know, maybe no kind of all tension and no release, whereas this one is almost the one that you would play if you wanted to go for a drive and what, you know, wind the windows down. I mean, it's still got that kind of aggressive, uptight kind of sound, but it
Yeah.
seems more like a full-on let's do a big rock song, which is kind of almost radio friendly.
So this is one where Mike McCarthy made them play it over and over and over and over again. He made them play it together and used it as the bass track. And he was such a sadist that he recorded over it every time they played it. So he never kept to take a previous
Mm,
take.
mm,
He just kept saying just play it over and over and over again. And then they got really angry.
mm.
And I almost kind of wonder if that's just why it sounds the way it sounds.
Spoon are the inheritors of the Steely Dan mantle, then, in a strange way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't really think of that. I kind of thought about the way some movie directors will
Yeah,
play
Kubrick.
with their actors, you know, kind of mental tricks with their actors to kind of get a certain performance out of them. And but yeah, it was it's a song about a bully.
Mm. Yeah, I was
Um
reading about this. Yeah, who used to go
and
to the shows? Apparently, he used to go to the shows after the event. He came to some of their shows, didn't he?
yeah, they eventually became friends. But yeah, it's a song about a bully. And I don't really focus in on their lyrics as much, you know, and I'm a lyric guy, but the line that I love is religion don't mean a thing. It's just another way to be right wing.
Mm.
It's like the perfect, this guy's just mean. It's a cool song.
I've got Paper Tiger down here, which I wanted to focus on because this one it's got the stick click going all the way through it, which always makes me laugh when I hear it. You know, being a drummer myself, I mean, there's been countless times when I've done the stick click at the start of a song. You know, you count the
Hmm.
song in with the stick click, and then the song starts,
Hmm.
and then you go back in and take out the stick click, and it's such an obvious idea. Let's just do a song where the drum part is the stick click, and
Yeah.
that's it. You know, it's just such a simple idea, but then this one is again sound wise. There's a sound in it. It sounds like somebody blowing repeatedly into a bag, like a sort of bellows
Yeah.
effect, and
Yeah.
some sort of localized electrical surge, which is just kind of sort of happening all the way through again. It's this thing. Is that an instrument? Is that something? Is that a malfunction on the desk which they've managed to
It's
use? You know.
that boom, 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 like
Yes,
thing.
that's it. That's it. Yeah.
It's actually a kick drum.
Okay.
It's actually a kick drum that they somehow manipulated. It almost sounds like it's kind of like sucking back in, you know, it's
That's
almost
right.
like
Yeah.
it's kind of sucking the sound back in. Yeah, it's like this song is like still to this day, in my opinion, their opus. It's perfectly placed because it's the centerpiece for the record. It's everything that the record is, kind of wrapped up into one song.
And it contains that really nice sentiment as well, isn't it? I will be there when you turn out the light. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's not an album which necessarily wears its heart on its sleeve, because you're always trying to, well, I'm always trying to work out what's he singing about, what's this all about, what's this guy's problem. But then all of a sudden in that song he just comes out with that sentiment, and you all of a sudden you get a sense of this kind of human being in there.
There is an underlying romantic there.
Final song I was going to highlight was the last song on the record, which is it Vittoria E? Vittorio or
Victoria.
Vittoria E?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this one is almost sort of Brian Wilson, or I don't know, West Coast harmonies I've written here. It's a really unexpected ending to the record. It's very lyrical.
Yeah.
It's very blissed out. It's got this lovely shimmering guitar. It just ends the record on a real sort of, gentle fade out, really, which is not really what you're expecting, having gone on this journey.
It's funny you said Brian because it makes me think of Dennis.
Oh,
Dennis
okay,
Wilson,
okay. Yeah,
solo record.
maybe.
That it's that choral of vocals, it's that chorus of vocals that they kind of like wrap in, which he has a lot on that album. And it's funny, it's like the title doesn't mean anything to the song. It's an Italian like subway stop or like a train stop or something, Vittorio E. Um,
Interesting.
but it's like the perfect closer. Their music was used in a movie called Stranger Than Fiction. Have you ever seen that movie?
I haven't, no.
Will Ferrell stars in it, and it's a comedy, but it's got very dramatic kind of elements to it. And Brian Rietzel, who's like kind of like a famous kind of score guy, has worked on uh, movies like Eternal Sunshine, of the Spotless Mind. Like he does a lot of work, but he was the music coordinator for that film, and he used Spoon music throughout the film. And there's a moment in Vittoria, like where Vittorio E is used in the film, and it's kind of like the perfect moment. Um, I would strongly recommend people check out that movie. Back to the Life has always been a favorite of mine. It's got these kind of claps and stomps in it, and it's got this recorded laughter effect. It's another one of those moments. There's like a kind of like a weird kind of thing, and it just kind of speaks to their studio work where when they were recording the stomps and the claps, somebody's cell phone fell out of their pocket and it landed on the floor, and they caught it on the mics. And when they went back and they listened for it, it actually added kind of like this syncopated rhythm like into the claps and the stomps, so they like left it in. So it's like it's I mean, that's just kind of they stumbled into a lot of happy accidents, I think, on this record.
It's funny how you mentioned the Claps and the Stomps, because there was another band which I thought of when I was putting my list together, and I know it's a band that you're not into, and that's Queen.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the We Will Rock You, obviously, you're talking stomps and claps, and also some of the sound manipulations that Queen did over the years, particularly in their heyday in the mid-70s, when they were really pushing the technology to its limits and, making incredibly inventive sounds, using voices often.
Yeah.
I think Spoon definitely fall into that. We touched on loads of different artists. We've gone from Eno and the Beach Boys, and I think
Yeah.
Queen fall into that as well. Studio innovators, the Beatles we've mentioned. It's sort of
Well,
it's a continuum, isn't it?
exactly.
It's all part of it, really.
That's what
Spoon.
I was going to say. I feel like they're the kind of band that falls into a lineage. Britt Daniel, in the same interviews where he's talking about Marquis Smith and the Fall, he'll also talk about the Bee Gees and AC/DC. I mean, that's just kind of who they are.
We're going to wrap up the video now, because we've rambled about Spoon all afternoon, and it was a great pleasure, John. It was particularly good to hear some of these inside stories about how those tracks were made.
They're one of the few bands that I can kind of give that much insight on. So yeah, thanks for letting me do it.